the panel on smart cities, lessons learned and future challenges. So in this panel, we have Brandy Merriweather from Buffalo Urban Development Corporation, Albert Shen from Verizon, Jennifer Tift from the City of Syracuse, and John Tolval from Cityfive. This panel was organized in collaboration with the New York State Wireless Association, in particular with Adrian Berezovsky, Leslie Snyder, and Douglas Dimitrov. I would also like to thank Verizon, and in particular Yenal Kuzuker, who helped a lot with the organization of this panel and of the whole event. So the event will be moderated by Leslie Snyder and Douglas Dimitrov. Leslie Snyder is a managing partner at Snyder & Snyder LLP. She leads the firm's real estate and commercial transaction group. In the past 25 years, Leslie has developed a unique practice involving telecommunications and real estate transactions, successfully obtaining government approvals for telecommunication towers and facilities, switching centers, distributed antenna systems, and other small wireless facilities. Leslie is a graduate of the Wharton School of Business and NYU Law School, and has been continuously recognized as a New York Metro super lawyer since 2014. Under her leadership, Snyder & Snyder is certified by the Women's Business Enterprise National Council and is a member of the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms. Douglas Dimitrov, already introduced in the previous session, is a partner at Phillips Light LLP with over 20 years experience in telecommunication matters. Now I can hand over to Leslie and Doug. Are you there?
Yes.
Who will introduce our featured speakers and moderate this panel. So for those who just joined, I'd like to remind how to interact with the speakers. You can click on the Q&A button on the right-hand side of your screen, type your question, click on Post Question, and then the moderators will review, approve, and publish your questions. And the presenters can reply either live through video, in the Q&A chat, or via email after the event. So without further ado, Leslie, Doug, you can proceed.
Thank you, Filippo. The topic this afternoon is Smart City, Lessons Learned and Future Challenges. As noted, we have with us today Albert Shen, the Executive Leader in Governmental Affairs for Verizon. We have Brandy Merriweather from Buffalo, Vice President of the Downtown Development, Buffalo Urban Development Corp. Jennifer Tift, Deputy Commissioner at Department of Neighborhood and Business Development of the City of Syracuse, and John Tolval, a partner of Cityfive. We're hoping that this panel will have sort of informational exchange, and we've framed various questions for our group. The first question, and I'll start with Jennifer, is what are your expectations for 5G and the wireless Internet of Things deployment in the next 5 years?
Thanks so much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, first, I would just like to start by really thanking the University of Buffalo, as well as the New York State Wireless Association and Verizon for convening this whole virtual workshop and this panel. I'm really thrilled to be a part of the panel and being able to share some of our experiences in the city of Syracuse, but also learning from some of my other panelists. I think this is going to be a pretty exciting conversation. It would be honestly very easy for me to take the whole next hour to answer this question. So I'm going to really try to keep it as brief as I possibly can. But, in one word, my expectation for 5G wireless connectivity and IoT or Internet of Things deployment is growth. In 2019, we in the city of Syracuse launched what we call the Syracuse Surge, and that's our city's strategy for inclusive growth in the new economy. This is not just a smart city strategy. This is not just our city's technology or digital strategy. This is our city and our region's economic growth strategy. From our perspective, becoming a smarter city means investing in digital infrastructure. It means investing in activity and IoT applications to help us as a city operate municipally more effectively, more efficiently, and in a more data-driven way. But these investments also enable regional economic growth. We really want to create an environment here in Syracuse where technology firms and new startups can come deploy their solutions and really bring those solutions to scale. For context, our city is just under 150,000 people. So, we're a pretty decent sized city, but we're not so large that full scale deployment or kind of full scale operations of some of these applications is really possible in a pretty short term. So that's really our vision. We've taken some pretty big steps, I'll say, in the last year or so to really expand our digital infrastructure and create these opportunities for greater connectivity and for IoT. One of these steps specific to 5G was to enter into an agreement with Verizon to really create a universal 5G network in Syracuse. We're really proud to say that as of last month, Verizon did announce Syracuse as one of its current 5G cities. We've been working with their team to really get them through the permitting process and to get them through the installation process in our city. And we really expect that in the next few years, our city is going to be fully wired for 5G, meaning north to south, east to west in the city of Syracuse, there will be 5G connectivity. And while we're super excited to be working with Verizon on this, and they've been a great partner for us, we're also in discussions with other carriers about similar 5G deployments. And so, again, from an expectations perspective, I think in the next 5 years in Syracuse, we'll see multiple carriers with 5G solutions in our market. Really quickly, to not take up too much time here, but with regard to IoT, which was the other part of your question, Leslie, we also have a really exciting deployments underway, which I want to just share with the group as a starting point. We recently completed the citywide conversion of our streetlight network into a LED-based, fully connected digital streetlight network. We've also taken over operations of that streetlight network from National Grid, our power utility here in Syracuse. And the network obviously not only enables us to more effectively and efficiently operate our streetlights and provide better service to our residents, but it also creates a digital network or backbone upon which we can launch and deploy lots of other IoT-based sensor arrays and other devices, which is really a critical part of our smart city strategy. So with that network, now kind of in place, we are about to launch 5 or 6 different sensor-based pilots in 2019, which will help us better monitor and manage multiple different city assets, from our water assets to our vacant housing and structure assets to our roads. People may be aware Syracuse is a snowy city. Don't know if you've heard. I think Buffalo is in the same situation. So we have lots of exciting pilots that we'd really like to test and deploy related to monitoring the safety of our roads, snowfall, deploying our snowplow fleet more effectively and efficiently. So those are just a few examples of some of the things we'll be looking to do. But again, I think growth really is the best way to kind of sum up my expectations for the next 5 years for not only 5G, but also IoT.
Thank you, Jennifer. A lot of exciting things going on in Syracuse. Well, to another snowy city, Buffalo. Brandy, if you want to highlight some of the things that Buffalo is doing with respect to your expectations for 5G.
Thank you, guys. Again, I just want to thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to talk about some of the things that we're looking to do in the city of Buffalo with respect to not just smart cities technology, but just the overall local economy in general. We've recently rolled out an initiative called Buffalo's Race for Place. And this initiative, it does encompass smart cities technology, but our vision for it really is to position Buffalo as a region, continue to keep Buffalo's position as a regional economic driver, really utilizing technology, infrastructure, and the public realm to attract companies, talent, and also entrepreneurs to the area, really with a focus around vibrancy and, as I like to call it, humanizing the people's experience with technology and with infrastructure. I don't know if humanizing is even a real word, but if not, I just made it up. And that's that kind of encompasses what we're looking to try to do. And really the idea with Race for Place is to bring the public sector, the private sector together to really focus on the public realm and why technology and why infrastructure can improve people's everyday lives. So whether that's accessibility from a wireless perspective or accessibility from a mobility perspective, how are we connecting folks to employment zones who maybe don't necessarily have a vehicle? How are we kind of integrating multiple modes of transportation into our infrastructure? Also looking at ways to provide better maintenance, ways to improve our green spaces and to utilize technology as a way to do that. So really our whole initiative really focuses around talent attraction and hearing from regular people in the community, the end users, the talent that we're looking to try to attract, and kind of breaking down some of the high level tech talk in a way that resonates with the general community and really helps to improve their quality of life, their access to employment, and their access to businesses, shops, things of that nature. So we really see this as an effort that not only revolves around smart cities, but that just revolves around placemaking and community just in general. And that's all embedded into our strategy to continue to move downtown Buffalo and citywide, the city as a whole, into the future of technology. So that's where Race for Place kind of comes into play. We've partnered with the City of Buffalo and also Douglas Development, M&T Bank. We've been able to put together what we call the Accelerator Fund. It's basically a $40 million fund to jumpstart us building out our infrastructure, particularly in and around One Seneca Tower, which is the location of M&T's tech hub that's under construction currently. So looking to kind of continue to build upon those partnerships. Very, very excited to work with M&T and Douglas Development and all the other partners, the City of Buffalo, Budsy, all coming together to put together this seed money to really start to put some dollars behind a lot of the infrastructure improvements that we're looking to roll out.
Sounds great. A lot of good things going on in Buffalo, like Syracuse. Albert, from Verizon's perspective, what are your expectations for 5G and the wireless Internet of Things? I see from Jennifer, Verizon's got a good start in Syracuse, and I know it's moving on to many other municipalities. So maybe you can highlight for us what your expectations are for 5G in the next 5 years.
Oh, yes. Thank you again for having me here. Sorry we can't be there in person, but hopefully someday we will. Yes, my name is Albert Shen. I'm with Verizon. I'm actually with the Smart Communities team out of here at Dallas, Texas. So I also run the national segment lead for Smart Airports too as well. So the aviation space is very passionate to me. I'm sure we all want to get back in the air and fly soon again. But yeah, specifically, the dialogue here today and also earlier this morning has really been, I think, inspiring in terms of the innovation that we've seen out there in Verizon in terms of our strategy of 5G and smart cities. And in my particular space, also smart airports is moving in very rapidly, but it's also a very, changing dynamic because of the pandemic response and the nature of, how this virus is playing out, and especially its impact on cities. So I do want to, thank the city officials here and the civil servants. I used to serve in the federal government in the Obama administration previously, and, know what it takes for the local electeds and local officials, the hard work you're all doing to do what you can with little and less resources as you're moving forward. And, but, my work on 5G and smart cities, the expectation has been, it's been innovative. And, when we launched back then when I was in the administration, when we launched the Smart Cities Initiative, we saw just immense of city innovation and desire to move the needle forward and capture the innovation of each particular city. So, and I've seen that same thing right now, even as 5G is being deployed around the country in various cities, both on the ultra wideband and also in the airports that we're working with. It is a very diverse makeup in terms of how cities are adopting and embracing smart cities or 5G as well. But the nature is, from my perspective, I've seen 5G is really the next platform in terms of helping innovation. And I think also, in my background in economic development, is really helping underserved communities build up economic development and innovation. And especially from an educational perspective, the things that we're doing, such as the Verizon Innovative Learning Program. So when there is 5G in the educational institution or cities, we're able to actually bring in those innovative technologies to the students directly, because that's where it's needed, especially in the underserved communities. We're going to reach about 250 schools around the country, hopefully about 10 million students by the next few years here. So that's the goal, and we see that as a huge advantage. But the expectation is we want to work with cities and partners. And I think that race for place that Brandy just talked about is really interesting, and we'll love to find ways to be able to, to converge on that in any ability, because it's really the local innovators that have to come up with the ideas. But we want to but it is about the end connectivity. I was just on a panel just a couple of days ago, the Cities Today's Institute. Bob Bennett runs that, and that was with many different CIOs from around the country at the city level in terms of what can we do on digital divide and digital equity. I mean, that is probably the biggest challenge that we're talking about, we're seeing. 5G I think is a gateway in terms of helping to bridge that. But the educational gap in our educational institutions is so immense right now. And so there's a lot of movement and amazing innovative technologies in terms of how can we deliver those connectivity to students, and especially the educators and the parents. Because as this oscillating economy and pullback of education in and out it's stressful for a lot of people. But I believe that with a good connectivity and platform that we can get to every community will enable a better, consistent educational base for students. And there's been a lot of conversation, especially on that last panel, in terms of, is the device better or the broadband better? Who adopts who? And different communities have come out with different interesting perspectives. And I think there's a lot of lessons learned to be there. So, but as Verizon, we want to make sure that, every city can get the best connectivity as possible. So you can spur your economic development, you can attract the workforce, attract the innovators. Just seeing the cool glasses and everything that's being developed on the innovation space is really fascinating. So that's the platform that we're operating on, and that's our expectation. But to work with so many different cities, I think is really going to be the fun part about all this. Yes, we're doing this all from home, but eventually it is the connectivity and that it's going to actually get us out of this pandemic. And, frankly, we're doing a lot on racial justice too, as well as Verizon. So without the connectivity, we never would have seen what happened to George Floyd. We never would have seen, the disparities in criminal justice. So for us in the corporate world, we're utilizing that connectivity to be able to, find criminal justice reform, work with law enforcement, public safety, transportation. Here in the city of Dallas, we're looking at a potential lighting project because it is part of public safety. If areas are not lit, then there's higher crime. So even the basics of that is very important. So this whole conversation about smart cities, 5G, like I said, is going to move and it's going to continue to evolve. But it's exactly this kind of panel that we're really looking forward to working with a lot of partners here at the table and around the country. So I'll conclude my remarks there and look forward to additional questions later. So thank you.
Thank you, Albert. John, you're our last on this question, so take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name's John. Good to be with you. Coming at you from Denver, a city maybe not quite as snowy as Buffalo and Syracuse, but we don't have as cool of architecture as you guys do. Two things. What do I expect with 5G and the wireless Internet of Things? One's urgent, and the other is overdue. I mean, the urgency is something that I used to call, I was the CTO for the city of Chicago for many years, the homework gap, but it's not even a homework gap anymore now. It's the school from home gap. I mean, there's nearly 12 million children that continue to live without a broadband connection. And, 5G in itself won't solve that, but it can help. And the backhaul that powers that 5G can help. I mean, this is not a nice to have anymore. It was a problem before the pandemic. And now the fact that we've got kids who don't have a way to connect in ways that we're doing right now, having an entire virtual conference, is a problem. So in terms of expectations, I see that number going down, and that's a good thing. The overdue piece of this, I think, is that it's been at least 10 years that major cities, bigger cities, at least at the beginning, have included plans for a kind of digital public way in their strategic plans. The funny thing is, looking back now, is what we were describing is really only possible with 5G and IoT. So the policy, maybe a rare instance, or at least the planning, a rare instance of it being ahead of the technology. Usually it's way behind the technology. But the hope is then and now is that the built environment, so that's everything from our streets to our street furniture to the vehicles that travel on them, become, in sort of computer science parlance, read-write instead of just read-only, right? An ability to interact with services and vehicles and infrastructure in the way that we've come to expect to do in our own homes, in retail establishments, in entertainment venues. Everyone benefits from that. So some examples would be, what 5G and IoT can do is help to unsilo our systems. A water main breaks underneath the street and it can talk to the traffic signals above it to divert traffic. That doesn't happen right now. There are 4 or 5 steps involved, multiple departments doing that. Lighting systems that respond to environmental conditions, bus shelters that talk to construction crews 3 blocks down, sidewalk furniture that knows its own state, right? Like, this is dirty, or, it's pretty shady right here if you're looking for a place in the shade, but it won't be shady in 10 minutes. That idea of a kind of real-time knowledge status queryability of the public way is something that cities have been dreaming about for quite some time, and really I think is only available given the technology we have there. So Leslie, I'll stop there.
Well, I think that's a lot of exciting things ahead, and I think you raise a lot of very good points. Our next question is really, since our focus is on the smart city, and this is for Albert, in the context of Verizon. What does Verizon look for in choosing cities for smart city deployment? And perhaps you can give an example of a recent deployment. I know Jennifer may have some thoughts on that as well. I think you're muted, Albert. Can you unmute? Jennifer, do you want to talk about some of the techniques that Syracuse Surge has implemented? Because I know it has attracted carriers to come to Syracuse.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to while Albert is figuring out how to unmute. So, there's been a couple of things that I think we've focused on really in the last year, specifically as it relates to the 5G deployment with Verizon. And some of this we obviously worked on in advance of signing our agreement with Verizon so that, once that agreement was in place, we could really hit the ground running, working with that carrier on the deployment. And so, for example, we really spent some time upfront to create some standards, some local standards for things like aesthetics and right-of-way use that we anticipated would be needed for the installation of small cells and other devices, which we haven't really, had to deploy in our city yet. And those standards, of course, became, a part of our permitting process once we did have our 5G agreement in place with Verizon. We also spent time innovating that permitting process itself. And so essentially what we did was, really in working with Verizon as our first carrier for 5G solutions, really tried to identify some consistent attributes or features of the different types of permits that they would be submitting to us. And as a result, we were able to create a bit more of a batch process around permitting, which ultimately enables us to have a bit more of an expedited ability to process those permit requests, which of course helps the carriers implement and deploy not only on schedule, but ideally even ahead of schedule, which has definitely, I think been one of our experiences working with Verizon to date. A couple of other things I'll just say, we spent a lot of time, obviously, as a part of the communications process, really sharing key information, not only about the city's strategy and our vision for some of these technologies, but really around things like the benefits of 5G and the safety of 5G with the community at large, and certainly with our Common Council, which was a necessary part of the deliberative process as we were having our 5G agreement, presented and ultimately approved by our Common Council. And I think that communication foundation was certainly very critical to that agreement being approved, but it also creates now the foundation so that hopefully as more carriers come, to the city, or frankly as other technology companies come to the city with potential solutions related to IoT and other devices, that we already have a good, I think, baseline and an understanding in our community about the value of some of these new technologies and the role that our community can play in them. So those were really, I think, some of the key things that we think not only have, facilitated the agreement that we have around 5G today, but really also create hopefully a attractive environment here in Syracuse for other kinds of telecommunications firms, but also other technology firms who may want to work with us on our smart city strategy.
I think you raise a very good point about the importance of education to the community about 5G, because there are a lot of, unfounded statements made about 5G that give residents concerns and sort of spread, rumors that really are not accurate. So I commend you on that. And secondly, I think for all the engineers out there that are always planning a time frame for when they're going to get permits and things, being able to know exactly what the process is and sort of a timing on it is really the key to deployment, because then you can move along the contractors and be able to have a date for when you can light it up and it's going to be working. So I commend Syracuse, and I know we're hopeful that there'll be a lot of other cities that will follow your lead, Jennifer, and do both the education and the permitting in a streamlined fashion. So I don't know if any of the other panelists want to shed some light on this question. Albert, I don't know if you're able to.
No, I'm back, so sorry. When you have teenagers, sometimes that's a digital divide by itself, but.
So I don't know if you want to highlight anything further that Jennifer didn't say, but if you do, now's your time.
No, thank you. I think in terms of, what we look for in smart cities and working with cities, I don't think it's really what we're looking for. It's really what the city needs in a lot of ways. And every city is so unique in its needs and disparate communities that it's trying to address. We're working with a lot of different cities: Atlanta, Dallas, Los Angeles, even tier 2 level cities. So it's really no set criteria, but there are a lot of commonalities when it comes to, the cities that we're working with and that are interested in smart communities. But there's also resources too that we're working with industry specifically. Like CTIA, I'm part of the Smart Cities Working Group, and we just put together a second round of the playbook that's coming out exactly for cities to understand, how to look at smart cities, how they can utilize common vocabulary, common language to map out a step-by-step process on a smart city. So industry has come together to, bring about a neutral platform on how to think and strategize, one, on resources, two, what are the technologies, what are the use cases that are out there. So So that's been a great platform for Verizon and many other carriers and all the other players in IoT in terms of, what is the 101 on smart cities? Because we're finding the education part is probably the biggest challenge first, because there's just so much information bombardment on what is smart city, whether the technologies, how much does it cost, how do you deploy? So that educational platform is very helpful. So I'll drop that in the box here a little bit on giving you that resource. But we want to work with as many cities as possible. So, and like I said, everyone's unique, but there are many commonalities too as well. So, but lighting, public safety, actually parking optimization and transportation has been one that I've seen an increase on, especially because as cities and business establishments go to more curbside type of delivery of services. So we're seeing the necessity for that kind of type of service. How can a restaurant manage its curbside more using video analytics and smart technologies for that establishment to gain more business potentially? So, and airports too as well. So, but yeah, so I'll leave it out there and happy to address any questions. But I'll put that in the chat box on that playbook on where to get it. So,
well, that'd be terrific. At this time, Doug Dimitrov, I'm going to pass it off to you, my esteemed colleague, to do the remainder of the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie, very much. And thanks, Albert, Brandy, Jennifer, and John for joining us today. Terrific information. We appreciate your time. Jennifer talked a little bit about this just a moment ago. So maybe I'll first ask Brandy this question, and then Jennifer, you can maybe add to it if you think it's helpful. And then we'll go to John. But the question is, what policies and opportunities do you as a city envision offering to attract providers to encourage deployment of 5G and ultimately use cases for IoT?
So right now what we've been working on, and a lot of it kind of dovetails off of a lot of the comments that Albert and also that Jen made with respect to doing assessments, looking at, we recently issued an RFP looking for analytics around the digital divide locally in the city. We've put together a Smart Cities committee looking at, what are some of the needs of the city, what innovative ways can we address some of our issues. Albert, one of the concepts that you talked about is something that we're looking at right now, curbside management. How do we kind of utilize technology to ease parking constraints? A lot of what you hear in downtowns, it's, there's not enough parking, I think the bigger issue is more so that maybe people aren't necessarily finding it or finding close parking or kind of having trouble identifying mobility options for that last mile from, where a parking garage may be a couple of blocks away versus where they're looking to try to end up. So a lot of that stuff is being looked at by our Smart Cities committee currently. We recently updated our telecommunications policy with respect to competition and things of that nature. So that's something that we've recently done as well. And we're just continuing to look at, best practices in other cities, really also putting a lot of focus around security of people's data. And, how do we kind of deploy something that the general public is going to feel comfortable with respect to the security of their data and things of that nature. So we've been doing a lot of work in this space, really looking at also timing and how we can kind of best integrate a lot of this technology. There's another term we've made up called future proofing, where basically, looking at our public infrastructure and trying to anticipate what technologies might come so that we're not building out infrastructure that is going to be obsolete in the next couple of years, and really trying to build in that flexibility with respect to what kind of technologies are expected and how we can quickly tap into those as we begin to attract more companies into the city. So there's a lot of work going on. We're also doing a lot of collaborations on, the mayor has a vision for a knowledge corridor, which basically will start at One Seneca Tower downtown, where the M&T Technology Hub goes, extending all the way up to UB South Campus. So looking at mobility options, smart cities technology, and things of that nature to really create kind of innovation, an innovation corridor that really connects the east and the west side of Buffalo and connects communities to education, to jobs, that supports the commercial corridors where so many of our minority and women-owned businesses are set up to do business. So there's a lot happening. I really, Jen, I'm so happy that you're on the panel today, because I hear so many great things about Syracuse and about some of the steps that you guys have taken, especially with respect to the light poles and things of that nature, purchasing those from National Grid. We're in discussions with National Grid currently about a lot of that as well. So it's great to see that you guys are doing it successfully, and we're definitely looking to try to implement some of those strategies into Buffalo, and hopefully, if you don't mind, I can pick your brain on a couple of things following the panel as well. So,
thanks, Brandy, and actually, Jen, I'd like to pick up on what Brandy just said, and maybe not wait for an off the conversation or off the panel conversation. What are some of the most important things, maybe picking up on what you said earlier, Jennifer, about the outreach to the community, to the council members, and the streamlining of the process? Can you talk a little bit in more detail about that and what you saw in terms of value out of those processes?
Yeah, sure. So, I think it kind of goes without saying that when, as a community, you're trying to launch and deploy some of these new technologies, which, really haven't been tested, that ubiquitously, there's lots of questions. There's rightfully concerns and some skepticism from the community at large. And, there's lots of myths out there, some of which, really it's important to debunk or to provide as much, data and real information as possible, just so that the community and decision makers really have the right information to make, decisions about some of these technologies, which offer so much promise and potential. And so it's one of those, I think, situations where I know there's a lot of risk. That's how a lot of policymakers, I think, look at some of this stuff, and policymakers, I think, by design, are very risk averse. And so a lot of times, municipalities would I think rather be maybe fast followers, or in some cases, not so fast followers, than be innovators. That said, I think around 5G, around IoT and some of these technologies, we felt it was pretty important to, do our homework, do our due diligence. Obviously, we were not going to propose, a policy or deploying any technology that we really felt had a risk to the community. Certainly that would never be the case. And so, of course, as a city, we spent a lot of time, not only talking to providers, but talking to, folks at the state level, at the federal level, in the telecommunications field, researchers, reading a lot of studies and gathering information to really validate, the effectiveness and the value of, 5G and some of these other technologies. And then, when we felt like it was an important opportunity for the city to take advantage of, of course, we started to engage our Common Council. They're a very important partner to the city administration in all of this, but then also the community at large. It goes without saying, because obviously the devices are installed, throughout the city. They're installed in residential neighborhoods as well as commercial corridors, and so we want to make sure that that the health and safety of our residents is the first priority. And of course, I think as a part of that dialogue and conversation, there still was a lot of healthy skepticism, voiced, and I think that's important. It's an important part of the process, and you're never going to necessarily convince, every single person. I think the proof is kind of in the pudding now. I mean, we were very specific in working with Verizon around our agreement with them, and as we will be with future carriers, for example, to have requirements in the agreement for testing the safety of the emissions coming from the small cells, for example. That was very important to us because we know, as one of the first cities who are really trying to undertake a citywide deployment, that we want to be able to test and make sure that the devices are not only working the way that they're supposed to work from a high-speed connectivity perspective, but that they are well within the FCC's safety standards. And so, that was one way that I think we were able to maybe allay some of the fears of the community, that there would be this ongoing testing, each year throughout the deployment, so that we could, pause the deployment if we felt like there were concerns about the devices. So that was kind of one example of a very specific thing that we built into that agreement, which I think directly addressed some concerns of the community and really came out of the dialogue that we were having with the community and with the Common Council. Another area that I think is also similar is really working with Verizon to prioritize the deployment in parts of the city that are not always first for investment in these new technologies. So, I think a few speakers have kind of mentioned the opportunity for inclusivity that comes with these technologies and the importance of bridging digital divide for all of our residents, not just for the most fortunate residents. And so we were pretty specific about, wanting to make sure that our 5G small cells, for example, weren't first deployed on the Syracuse University campus. I think that's always sort of an expectation that the campus area is going to kind of be the first to get some of these technologies. And the campus is a very important partner of ours in general, and we love Syracuse University. But we wanted to make sure that neighborhoods, which have historically been underinvested in, were actually among the first to have 5G small cells deployed. And that's the kind of standard that we intend to apply, frankly, to all of our technology deployments in the city. And so, and Verizon's been a very, kind of willing partner in that, and going along with kind of the prioritization of those things. And so we really appreciate that. I think I kind of covered off on at a high level the permitting process, and that, like I said, we basically were able to work with Verizon early on in that deployment, for example, to identify some of the commonalities of the different types of permits that they would be requesting, and basically create a streamlined process around those attributes, so that if a permit, basically, if a future permit request has those same attributes, that we can basically fast track or expedite the approval of that permit. We don't have to treat it like its own unique permit request, because in fact it's not. And so that was really, I think, probably the key to developing this batch process. It took a little bit more, probably more time invested up front in kind of doing that classification, but once we did that, it enabled the process to move pretty smoothly, I think, thereafter.
Yeah, just on that point, Jennifer, question: do you have a sense for what the time frame is on average from application received to permit issuance? Is there an idea of how long that takes on average?
Oh, to be honest, I'm not our permitting director, so I don't have that data with me. But perhaps someone on the Verizon team knows the answer to that.
Yeah, maybe they do. But if Albert, if you have a sense, we'd love to hear. But to the extent you don't, that's fine. John, let me just ask you the question. We've heard from Brandy and Jennifer from their cities. From your perspective, former CTO of Chicago, where I know probably during your earlier stages in that role, you were thinking about things, as one of the big 2 or 3 cities in the country. But even more broadly than Chicago, what other types of policies or opportunities are there to help attract providers?
Yeah, I mean, apart from just efficiencies in the permitting process, which is really clerical, administrative, and back office, cities like Syracuse, Buffalo, and Chicago, which is, say, 19th century cities with lots of infrastructure that is sort of layered on top of one another, one of the things we found is it offering sort of creative access to this. The elevated tracks, well, you don't have to dig a trench if you run your fiber that way. Things like that, thinking about what we already have and permitting that rather than sort of defaulting to let's rip up the street. But then there's sort of innovative new technologies like, okay, we're ripping up the street. Let's put down, like a shared utilidor, which is a word I learned, Brandy, way back when, but like a shared space so that all the providers could run their stuff through here. Those sort of forward-looking things. And that word shared or neutral, which I know some providers don't care for, is actually neutral host providers, shared infrastructure, alerting all the potential providers when the street is open. Those are the kinds of things I think from a city perspective we see this just makes good sense to lower the cost to everybody, including the telecommunications companies. I'd also say from a policy perspective, sort of wearing my sort of consulting hat, is that there are so many cities doing strategic and comprehensive plans that if they're not smart cities specifically, they've got a section on that. Is it getting in with, the telecommunications companies being at the table and positioning connectivity as foundational as, clean water in those strategic plans is important. But more exciting than policy, because policy is meaningless if there is no market demand, is the opportunity, I think, that our city colleagues, our city worker colleagues, and then our end users, us, people living in cities, we expect the city that we live in will be as accessible with our digital services as things in our house and in entertainment and retail, as I mentioned before. It's becoming more and more curious that we can't do the same things to our city's infrastructure. Like, is the picnic table that I really like in the park, is that open right now? Why shouldn't I be able to do that? Why shouldn't I be able to ask that in the same way that I know that a restaurant is or is not open? And so I think that's good news overall, right? That there is a market demand coming from the sort of bottom up for these services. And, any mayor that listens to his or her constituency is going to, do something about that.
Great. Thanks, John. Albert, anything you want to add from your perspective based on what we just heard from the city reps?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the ideal world, we would love to have a uniform permitting, when it comes to the design and construction and the deployment of the technologies. And however, in the ideal world, but that's simply not the case given just the wide disparity of or uniqueness of diversity of every city and even the suburban and rural divide too. When you get out to the rural communities, it becomes even more of a challenge in getting that. And we hear that a lot. So it's a complex problem. It's something, on the policy level, we got folks in DC working on that, all around the country. Industry does work together. In some cases, when you go to an airport, where I do a lot of my work, there's distributed antenna systems that are shared system, and so we've seen that a lot. But sometimes that does create, a little bit of conflict, I have to admit. But otherwise, we work through it. Industry does work together cooperatively in each of those ecosystems. So, but I think things are moving forward. And as I said before, the pandemic has definitely exposed a lot of the, the criticalness of time and speed in order to get connectivity up as soon as possible. Public Wi-Fi is one I hear a lot about, cellular connection. Our 4G LTE network is very expansive and very broad, and that's where we were focusing a lot to deploy a lot of our, educational tools on that. So, but as 5G moves forward, every city has some unique challenges and some may not. Some may value their assets differently than other cities, So we're doing our best to educate them that the necessity of, deployment, and if we can get ultra wideband into a city, then, that's an economic development tool, to bring in the innovators, to bring in incubators and bring in, and Brandy mentioned too, my background was in minority business development. And there are so many minority businesses that I used to work with in the federal government that are innovators, and that access to that innovation is so critical. So So I carry that as I move forward too in Verizon and embracing our supplier diversity side and bringing those innovators along with the 5G deployment. So, but I think we're making good progress here overall. So definitely look forward to working forward with everyone here this day going forward. So yeah.
It's exciting. Thanks, Albert. Before we shift to a little bit of economic development, I want to ask or just make one point, and that, Brandy, you mentioned future-proofing, and Jennifer referred to this as well, and John did. Just as background, the FCC's BDAC, Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, almost 2 years ago, put together a model code for municipalities, and one of the key elements we heard, particularly with from the city representatives that were part of that process to develop this model code, was the future proofing. How do we ensure that if we're going to rip up a street, repave sidewalks, put in new sidewalks, take out existing city infrastructure that may be below ground or above ground, how do we plan ahead? And one of the things that we had a lot of discussion around in that process was to really develop a communications process, because that's what it's all about, meaning talking to the providers or current providers and prospective providers, and at least alerting them as to the plans for the city if they're going to rip up a corridor, for example, and having a list of that's kept up to date as best as you can of who the contact people are at existing and potential providers, because you want to try to dovetail their plans with yours. And frankly, what we heard was some great stories about by simply identifying, sending an email, following up with a phone call or whatever, and saying, "Hey, we're not sure what your plans are, but we're going to take this major corridor in a neighborhood or in a downtown area, wherever it may be, and we're going to spend millions in city capital." And by simply identifying that, carriers, telecom companies, even other utility companies, would say, wait a minute, that's important to know. We didn't have this on our agenda for this year, but we have it on our agenda for the next year or the 2 years. And you know what? It makes sense to save a lot of dollars on our end and not have to ask you to rip up the street again. So those were some great conversations. So I just wanted to point that out. Shifting to maybe economic development, I'd like to ask, what are the industries, both new and existing, that you want to continue to foster vibrancy with? Do you foresee coming or growing in your cities? And what industries, new ones maybe, are you trying to attract? So maybe I'll start with Jennifer first, and then I'll go to Brandy and John.
Yeah, happy to weigh in here. So, our hope basically is that this high-speed digital infrastructure and IoT and all of these emerging technologies that we're really focusing on right now, both provides for growth for some of our existing industry clusters that are really important to the vibrancy of our city and the region as a whole, but then of course also do attract new industries and businesses. Syracuse actually has been a leader since the early 20th century in radar, sensing, and aerospace fields. A lot of people, I don't think, necessarily realize that. And currently, Central New York is a global leader in unmanned aerial systems, so that means drones. And our region's actually one of the FAA's 7 regions nationwide for unmanned aerial systems for the testing of beyond visual line of sight operations. So this is really a current industry cluster that has always been a very strong performer in our region, but is growing very rapidly now, and that we see really as being not only a differentiator for us from an economic development perspective, but really an area that we want to double and triple down in the months and years moving forward. The intersection of unmanned aerial systems, basically autonomous systems, and IoT is super exciting to us. And we really want that to be, one of the clusters that we, really continue to make some investments in. We have a regional high-tech growth incubator here called the Tech Garden, and they are actually the home to New York State's Genius New York competition, which is actually a $3 million annual business competition focused on unmanned systems and IoT for startups. And so, that's one of the I think resources that we can leverage among others to attract individual businesses, entrepreneurs, but to also grow, I think those sectors. Really from an emerging industry perspective, we've got our eyes on a couple, but I will say, the area that we're most excited about and that we're really treating as truly its, kind of its own emerging industry is the area of smart cities. We're super excited about the global growth projections in smart cities. All of the industry analysts have been projecting, 20 to 30% CAGRs for, quote unquote, the smart cities market for the last several years. And I expect that will continue to be the case. And we really believe that Syracuse is well positioned to become a hub for companies in that market area. And that we can capture, a piece of that CAGR here locally, not only from the cities that are the entrepreneurs and the companies that develop smart city applications, but really others in their supply chain as well. So, we're super excited about that, I think, as kind of an emerging, sort of new industry area, if you will.
Great. Brandy.
Yeah, so there's a number of I have so many thoughts. You already know that about me, though, Doug. So as far as companies we're looking to attract, we're obviously looking to continue building off of this technology hub at One Seneca Tower, anchored by M&T. Also continuing to work with organizations like 43 North and their business competition. Entrepreneurship and innovation is another big piece, just to kind of dovetail off of some of the remarks that Jen made, looking at really creating opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurs. They're really the innovators that, come to the market with those great ideas that really help to foster growth. Another priority for the city as well is, capturing remote workers, workers who may even work outside of Buffalo, but have that ability to live in a different place, separate from where they work, particularly with a particular focus on minorities and Hispanic talent and workers, trying to attract them to Buffalo. So we've been working with our partners at like Invest Buffalo Niagara and so many others. And another key component of the Race for Place initiative is really heavily focused around feedback from end users. So talent that is new to Buffalo, talent that may be considering relocating someplace else, and trying to hear, what some of those amenities and things that they're looking for with respect to identifying a place where they want to be. So we've been doing a lot of work from that perspective, making sure that, what we're providing and the amenities that we're providing and the focus that we are looking at is reflective of what the end users want to see. And then also kind of trying to cast the net out a little bit wider with respect to who we engage in and around our planning efforts. We have a lot of, folks who have been really invested in development in the city for a number of years, but really kind of trying to broaden that net so that we're hearing from diverse audiences. We're hearing from young people. We're hearing from talent that may be new to Buffalo and maybe have some experiences from other places where they live, and kind of have those expectations with respect to making Buffalo their home. Also, another big piece is the small business community. The small business community that, again, I'm going to use humanize again. I keep saying that word because it's just so important. Focusing on small businesses and that first floor experience that really makes an area feel like an area, that makes it feel like a place that you want to be. So that first floor experience, those, great shops, those great restaurants, those great places where people meet. There's a lot of studies that show when you are relocating from another city, if you don't find your quote tribe within 6 months, it's highly possible that you may be looking to move again. So creating those environments where people can really exchange ideas, build friendships, and really create that sense of community, and really with a laser focus on diversity. We want, the businesses that we support and that set up shop in our commercial corridors to really be a reflection of the diversity of the city in general. So I know that I went on and on, but generally that's what that's a general framework of what types of industries and what types of businesses that we're looking to try to support and foster moving forward.
Thanks. That's terrific. John, so we just heard some different perspectives, different focuses. Anything you can add in terms of what you're seeing elsewhere and maybe recommendations for Buffalo and Syracuse?
Yeah, just real briefly, I mean, Jen and Brandy nailed it, but I think in the last couple of months, we've seen specifically the actualization of many cities' plans for flexible space, flexible public space. I mean, a lot of that was sort of forced upon us with, lockdown and the demand for parking going down 90% temporarily. But the larger idea, this idea that, the city's skin is like the most overlooked organ of a healthy urban body, and cities know that it's like an underutilized asset. 5G and IoT is there to activate that. I mean, that is technology that allows you to pop up a business where, parking was 24 hours ago. And I think that, technologies such as the ones we're describing are perfect for quick interventions and experiments. Sweden actually has done some great work around sort of modular spots and powering those with technology. So I'll stop so that Albert has a couple of seconds to end it all.
Albert, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, great. Thank you, John and Brandy and Jen. Thank you so much for your cooperation. I haven't had a chance to work with you, but I've heard great things from our Verizon team. But one industry that I think we're starting to see that's really emerging, especially in 5G and IoT, and we're starting to have a lot of conversation here at Verizon, is the healthcare industry. Telehealth is something that's emerging, that's becoming very popular. This platform we're using now, Genes, is part of our telehealth strategy, and it is HIPAA compliant. So as that begins to build out, especially in a pandemic or post-pandemic world, how can we continue to leverage this type of, from a patient to a healthcare provider, or even within the health provider space? And I think 5G is going to be a critical part of, evolving and moving forward the healthcare industry as well, and the delivery of equitable healthcare to communities and underserved communities as well. Because we've seen the stories of people can't get the right healthcare in the rural communities because of COVID. Can telehealth be part of that solution? And can also 5G help enhance that, part of that incredible access to healthcare that many communities don't have? So I'll just leave it at that as one industry that is definitely emerging and having a lot more conversations and a lot of movement about when it comes to 5G and smart cities. So, but thank you for having me.
Terrific point to end it. Leslie, is there anything else?
We've gotten a few questions that I was asked to ask the panel. So I'll set the question, and then maybe Jen or whoever thinks it's most applicable, if you know the answer. Someone is asking, how has the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, been implicated in connection with sidewalk area deployments, and how have you handled that? Do you have some experience with that, Jen?
So unfortunately, we don't. We haven't actually done any, sidewalk area deployments as of this point yet. So this hasn't actually come up for us.
And then I'll jump in as well. The city of Buffalo, we take ADA into account for all of our infrastructure projects. We have an ordinance, it's called the Complete Streets Ordinance, and it really requires us to take a look at infrastructure, not just from the perspective of vehicular traffic, but to take into account pedestrians, folks who maybe have mobility issues, things of that nature. We rolled out a master plan for infrastructure where the whole concept of it was a people first concept. So if you build it for people, by default, it's safe for everyone else. So that's definitely something that's always at the forefront of what we're looking to do. Walkability and accessibility, mobility and micro mobility options that utilize some of the technologies that we've talked about today are all embedded in our infrastructure and sidewalk streets planning. So we're continuing to roll out a lot of those initiatives and key pillars with respect to building out infrastructure.
Great. I think, Doug, unless you have anything else, I know we're close to the time, so I really wanted to thank everyone. It's been a great panel, and I do want to just do a shout out to Jen. Someone commended Syracuse and said you're doing a great job with all the shot clock timelines and meeting all the requirements for permitting. And there was a comment for Brandy saying they were very excited to hear about everything that Buffalo's doing. So we really thank you, on the ground, and John giving us such insight from what you did in Chicago and what you're doing now. And Albert, how important 5G is not only to health, but also to business, to education, and how it really, I think, frames the spectrum of the world that we're in and how critical it is. So Doug, unless you have anything else, I think they're probably ready for the next panel that's going to contend. I don't know if you want to talk about, and maybe you've done this already, the New York State Wireless Association, the scholarship. I don't know if this is have that plan.
I'll go quickly. Yeah, thanks very much, Leslie. So for anyone out there who is a student or knows a student at an undergraduate 4- or 2-year degree level that's involved in telecom or is interested in telecom, New York State Wireless Association, nyswa.org. If you go online, there's information about a scholarship program that we've just implemented, and there is money available for students. And it's any of the SUNY system statewide colleges and universities. So SUNY Buffalo, Syracuse, I think you've got the some of the programs, but certainly your community colleges in Syracuse, for example, and any of the other 2- or 4-year degree granting institutions within the State University of New York system, students are eligible to apply.
Hey, Doug, real quick. To those in Buffalo, I'm a sort of a closet Buffalo Bills fan. That my heart goes up with that loss that day against the Cardinals. That was. I feel for you.
Thank you. More good stuff to come, though.
Yes.
For the Bills. Thanks all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So thank you, everyone. And I would like to thank all the speakers and the panelists in this very interesting and enlightening panel. And I would like to thank also Leslie and Doug for moderating it, and also for promoting this opportunity for undergraduate students. Now it's time to continue with the program, and the next item is the poster session. And I will hand over to my co-chair, Zhang Yu, who will moderate this session. Hello, Zhang Yu.